any sense how many were able to re-register?
I'm gonna have to look.
Okay.
And we are now recording as well, by the way.
Okay. So Tony, don't say anything you don't want to be recorded.
Never.
Or say something so we can show you the recording after.
That's right.
How you look at it, right?
That's totally right.
Abena, I like your dress at the back, at the background.
Oh, thank you.
So
I'm
Abena, are you
going-
getting the dog? Did you say in 4 months? Is that when you'll have it?
No, we have the dog. We got him right after quarantine started.
Oh,
And
nice.
so we got him at 7 weeks. And we had to do virtual training quite quickly.
Oh, that's tough, eh? Wow.
Quite often. And so that was great. But then the dog parks were closed. So that socialization piece was a challenge.
Yeah, totally.
But
Wow.
it's been good fun, but it's definitely different to have a new puppy in quarantine situation.
It's a lot of work too. It's like sort of like having a baby. That's what we have a dog as well.
It's having a baby. It's exactly what it is.
Totally. I think so. I always tell people, right? It's the best thing in the world. Like it's incredible for your family, your children, but you got to be prepared to work, especially when they're puppy before they're trained, because it's a lot of late nights. They get sick like everybody else does. And
But people
Actually,
will look after your kids, not your dog.
yes. It's totally true.
Lauren, I'm going to go on mute.
Thanks, Derek.
I'm here as a backup to Lauren in case his internet goes down.
Yeah, I've been having Wi-Fi
Otherwise,
problems.
I'm going to be silent here in the background.
Thanks, Derek. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, so for Abena, Tony, and Tali already knows that, but I have had, I've got Rogers. I've had terrible Wi-Fi issues where I get punted out of meetings occasionally. So I've got Derek as a backup in case that happens.
All right.
Okay. Good stuff.
Abena, we haven't met. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks.
I
How
don't
are
think
you?
I've met. I also got to look at it. It's Tali, right?
Yeah,
You look familiar, but I don't think we've met either.
we connected on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a LinkedIn promoter, but yeah. So thank you for being part of LinkedIn, and I'm glad we're connected.
Yeah.
Your name is familiar, Tony, because I believe one of my girlfriends used to work at Capital C, Tracy Chinsam.
Oh, Tracy, I love Tracy. She went off and went into the fast food world. I never understood that. No, but she's fabulous. She was just a delight to have in the company. We had an amazing agency. We had some incredible people, and Tracy was certainly one of them. Say hi to her, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, I'd heard you did some incredible work.
Yeah, we had a great run. We had a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm glad I'm out of it.
You ran 2 shops, right?
Hmm?
Did you have 2 different shops?
Yeah, I had 2 agencies and a research firm during my career.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah, bought and sold myself a few times, and learned hit a lot of hiccups along the way, but came out of it somewhat unscathed.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So Andrew, we're starting up in a couple minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes ago, the attendees are coming in.
Okay, I'll wait for you. Go ahead.
Now 1 minute. If you'd care to lead us in a song, go ahead. Okay, we are at noon. Lauren, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lauren Solway, and I'll be your moderator for today. I am the co-president for the Response Marketing Association. It's so great to be here today. So we're going to cover what we think is a very robust and topical area, which is really about marketing in a crisis. So the question we're going to ask the panel essentially is, how do you, as a leading brand and or marketer, really market in an environment like today? Because it is complicated. It's no longer business as usual. And when you think about what's going on in the world, we really need to be mindful of the ever-changing landscape, whether it's COVID-19 and or racial discrimination towards marginalized communities. It's certainly not easy for brands. It's certainly not easy for individuals, and it's certainly not easy for marketers. But as we know, the economy needs to continue to tick along, and business needs to continue on. So we need to continue to market and communicate. And so the big question is, how do you do so while maintaining a leadership position for your brand without appearing insensitive or deaf as to what's happening in the world around you? And so we're going to explore this topic with what I think is a great panel of experts, and we'll meet them in just a moment. And so in terms of protocol, we'll take the first roughly 40 to 45 minutes or so, and we'll have a good discussion with the panel. And then we're going to save the last 15 minutes for questions. So your questions, as they're streaming in, we'll be capturing all of them, and then we'll be addressing them over the last 15 or 20 minutes of the session. So that's the plan for today. So on that note, why don't we meet our panel? So we've got Abena Perryman, Tony Chapman, and Tali Hansanov. And I'm going to start with Abena. Abena, maybe you can introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background and your experience most specifically in marketing and customer experience.
Great. Thank you, Lauren, for the introduction, and thanks for having me today. As Lauren mentioned, I'm Abena Perryman. I'm a managing partner at Andrew Perry. We are a boutique firm. We're marketing thought partners. We help organizations going through transformation. My background, I have an HBA and an MBA from the Richard Ivey School of Business. I've had over 20 years working with organizations, whether they be large or small, helping them deepen their relationship with customers.
That's great. Thanks, Abena. Tony, maybe over to you. You can tell a little bit about your background.
Great, thanks. I appreciate being here. I've had a 30-year career in terms of the agency world as an entrepreneur. First 12 was an agency called Communique, which was really focused at internal communications. And what I try to practice my craft there was helping people present their ideas. I always called it head, heart, and hand, so that people get it, feel it, and actually acted upon it. I shifted over and spent another 22 years building a consumer-facing agency called Capital C. We had a great run, won Agency of the Year, and a whole wall full of trophies. Adjacent to it, I had a research firm called Fresh Intelligence. Sold it all 6 years ago. Wanted to speak my mind, chase microphones all over the world. So conferences, hosting, speaking, and more recently, I have a podcast called Chatter That Matters, which is something I'm incredibly passionate about because most of it's focused on small business and Canada.
Thanks, Tony. Great to have you. Tali, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for having me. I have 15 years experience in digital marketing, in particular, working with different brands. I worked with big agencies here in Toronto, running campaigns for quite big brands, and 25 years experience in technology overall. What we do, we help businesses leverage power of internet to generate more business, basically more leads and sales, and helping with strategy and taking all the process from beginning to the end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tali. Great to have you as well. So we've got a great breadth of experience on the panel. So I'm going to ask the first question, which is really more directed at your current businesses right now. So how would you say the current crisis, we talked about COVID-19, we talked about marginalized communities through discrimination. How do you think that's impacted your business or your viewpoint overall? And Tony, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, I think it's a very different time. I mean, there was a seismic shift that happened in marketing about 10 years ago. And that was first where marketers went from spending money, coming into work every day with the opportunity to spend a budget, experiment, get creative, look at all sorts of different ways and how to engage the audience. And this is probably the second biggest one where I went from spending money to investing. So that was a whole different level of scrutiny. A lot of people trying to play quarterback in my marketing budgets, everybody competing for it, demanding what my immediate ROI was. And today it's a little different, but the same intensity of scrutiny, which is corporate reputation. So just because I market something and say, for example, I'm Coke and I can open happiness, knowing that the world out there is armed with social media slingshots, and for a brand, they're not just talking about who they are and why they feel they matter. They're absolutely representing the entire balance sheet and the entire value of that organization. So we've gone from a world of spending money to investing money to be under intense scrutiny in terms of what we say, period. All of that is really creating a world where we're getting really focused on saying very little and hoping still that people pay attention to it.
Yeah, it's a great response. I mean, the notion of scrutiny unequivocally when you're in the middle of a crisis. Abena, how about you? What would the impact be on your current business?
I think it's twofold. When we saw the beginning of the year start, February into April, there's been a decline on spending as clients were taking a wait and see approach to understand how the pandemic would impact them. As we moved into May into June, things are picking up as clients are looking at, COVID's here for the next 12 or so months. How do we start to manage within this new world or the new economy? I think when we look at the social justice movement that's going on, it's impacting both on a personal level as well as a professional level. And so reflecting on times that I've personally experienced discrimination, or my husband or my son, has brought up a lot of emotion for us that we've been talking as a family. And then when we look on a business perspective, there are opportunities opening up as new clients are looking at how do we manage in this new dynamic? What are the things we should say?
Yeah, that's a great answer, Abena. And so I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question, please be sure to post it because we will be covering it off over the last 15 minutes or so. So Tali, over to you. Abena said something interesting, not only on the impact on her from a business standpoint, but from a personal, professional standpoint as well. What would your response be in terms of the impact for you overall?
So overall, we have been lucky because my team is remote anyways. So from that point of view, it didn't really affect much. But what I see overall, that many businesses learned that actually you can operate remotely and be quite successful and productive. And actually some researches have been done and saying that remote companies working, they're more productive nowadays. What people actually like, it's more on communication part, and they missing the team and they missing, all this communication. That's where companies trying, to bring together weekly, daily calls, teams together. But overall, I think that many businesses realize that they have to have kind of backup. They can't put all the eggs in one basket. So if someone haven't been before online and suddenly they facing this situation, they can turn, sometimes it's too difficult to turn things too quickly. So basically you have to invest, and going to the Tony's point about investment, you have to invest in different markets and activities rather than, concentrating on one. That's what I see. And regarding clients, I see some clients actually increase budget. For some clients that we have, some did decrease budget, but some increased marketing budget just to be above the competition when it was lower.
Yeah, thanks for that. So Abena, back to you. So I guess, Tali, again, a good point around, obviously, given the current situation, more people are working from home, they're more digitally connected than ever before. When you think of that contextually, and you were to compare it to any of the other events historically, what we're going through right now, is it most closely to 9/11? Is it more closely related to 2008 during the recession? Is it the early recession back to depression? If you were to correlate it back to another time like now, knowing that no two times are really equal, is there any other period that would come to mind that would have impacted you the same way?
I think that the nuance or the uniqueness of this current environment is that you've got a combination of events. So 9/11 was a terrorist attack that united people around ending terrorism. There was great loss felt. And so, yes, there was an economic impact, but I believe that that event was isolated. Then you have 2009 and the housing crisis. And so that was more financial impact and the recession. Here you've got two big movements or crises. You've got the pandemic that started the recession that we've dipped into, and now you've got the social justice movement that is just as significant, that is spreading almost like wildfire across the globe in terms of these two big issues that people are talking about. And so I think that it's more of pulling together events from the past, and this is unprecedented in terms of the impact and the reach. And I think, you know, both Tali and Tony talked about social media, and the impact of sharing stories is instantaneous. And so, you know, after the George Floyd incident, I remember looking on social and seeing, I believe it was a soccer team in Europe taking a knee. And, you know, when before have you seen such instantaneous reaction from around the world? And then you would turn on the news and you'd hear that there were protests across the world around racial justice and social justice and racial discrimination. So I think it's an unparalleled time that we're a part of.
Yeah, so interesting. And Tony, I'd be very curious on your perspective, having started and operated several businesses over a long tenure. What would you most liken times like today to, based on historical?
Well, some great points have been made in terms of how many forces of change we're dealing with. But if you wanted to pick a time, I'd say the Great Depression. And the reason being is that my mom grew up in the Depression. She was a Depression baby. And she instilled a lot of those values in me in terms of saving and security and wanting to stand on firm ground. And I think I've given them to my daughters. And that was 90 years ago. And it's still staying around. And I think it's because people had to learn how to survive, and they had to find resilience, and they had to do a lot more with less. And we're only at day one of this impact, this pandemic, and not so much even whether there'll be a vaccine or not. It's really what we've done to our economy. And coming out of it right now, we're kind of living in this bubble because we're printing money, but in the assumption that's got to end, I think that we're going to feel this for decades to come. And even the grandchildren of some of the people talking, and they're much younger than I am, are going to hear about what we'll go through in the next 5 years. So that would be my first point. Second thing, I think the great point was being made. A lot of people right now are experiencing the aftermath of a president of the United States that has done nothing but divide a country, the world's greatest economy. And it's taken away the middle ground. So you feel very uncertain and not safe. And you're kind of go to one way or the other, and the social media fuels it. And and so we're not finding consensus anymore. And what we're seeing as the uprising is the social justice movement, but I'd also say it's an animal welfare movement. I would say it's also an environmental movement, that we're demanding a new contract because we're putting a lot of the focus on capitalism in terms of the world we created. So I think for all of those reasons, the length of time we're going to experience the aftermath of COVID, and the fact that as we have time to self-reflect and look around and going, this isn't the world that we really want to live in, I think we're going to be into, the next, it could be decades before we come out of it, hopefully as one human race.
And Tali, what would your perspective be? Would it be similar to Tony's and Abena's?
I actually agree with Tony that we will see the stronger impact later on. Now it's kind of uncertain. Nobody knows kind of what to expect. There is some assistance kind of, but it's not very certain. I think we will see a greater impact later. But what I wanted also to mention, how current situation is different now compared to 2008 or other events prior. It's more information available and faster at the moment due to social media and people sharing and everything else. So everything is pretty much open. If you believe it or not, if it's negative or not, it's a different story. But everything is rolling much faster than in events prior to this, right? So whatever is happening, it gets so quickly out like nothing before. So I think it's comparing to events prior, I think it's quite unique. I agree with Abena, situations that we're facing at the moment. And we will see the impact later. I feel it like stronger impact.
Great, thanks, Tali. So let's start with this next question with you. So this is what's on everybody's mind as a marketer, obviously. So we've talked a lot about the playing field, the impact on us personally, our business, what's happening in the marketplace vis-a-vis historical events. But if you're a marketer in today's world, or a brand in today's world, how would you best approach your, best adjust your approach and strategy when you think about COVID-19 and discrimination in marginalized communities? Like, how do you adjust your go-to-market strategy or your communication strategy to consider what's happening? What would you do differently?
So a few things very important. First of all, obviously, to be empathetic regarding your customers and people overall. And really, I feel now it's moment about bringing the value, not really pushing and selling, but more trying to understand the other side as a customer. So basically putting yourself in customers' shoes, right? And as an example, maybe sending an email saying your points expire July 1st. It's not a good time right now to do it. Because, and I don't want to mention the brand, but it's just an example of not a good tactic to use at the moment. So you have to be more, especially that everything was closed except of, drive-through. But even then, it's kind of doesn't show your empathy. It doesn't show your understanding, right? So probably it's a good idea to pause those communications if it was pre-scheduled, right? Not to send such messages. And also I strongly suggest personalization. So again, not to send mass messages to everyone, just, templated, but really, so people will feel that you talking to them. So personalization, it's highly, highly recommended, and value on top of everything.
And Abena, over to you. Would additional points to add on that? I agree with Tali.
Yeah, I think Tali makes some great points. What I was thinking about as she was speaking was the fact that there's an emotional toll or an emotional tax that people are experiencing that you can't see. So me personally, I lost 2 family members to COVID in March, and getting emails about, from the Gap talking about we're in this together and, we've got a sale online, it seems like it was tone deaf. And so what are things that brands can do to understand this new environment? We've seen the commercials with the certain piano music in the background, the same tagline, we're in this together. It's all the same. The messaging is the same, and it's flooding the market. So what I would suggest as you move forward, thinking about how you can differentiate your message and really connect with customers during this time, whether it's through laughter and humor, whether it's through empathy, like Tali was talking about, your points are expiring, but you haven't had a chance to shop. How do you start to readjust your communication strategy based on what you're currently facing and your customers are currently facing? The second, I'd say, think about if you need to message people as frequently as you have been.
Yeah, good point.
Because, everyone wants to get on here are the steps we're taking to keep you safe during COVID. And then, the social justice piece, we stand by, taking a knee down to racism and discrimination. Pick and choose your points so that you can differentiate yourself in the market. I think the last piece I'd say is we're in a period of marketplace disruptions. This is a significant disruption where our economies have been closed. People have gone remote, and we've had to work on getting up on our technology. So how can you leverage those technology pieces, whether it's through automation, whether it's through AI, to leapfrog into what the future will look like? If we're a low-touch economy, how does your business need to pivot and stay pivoted to be able to operate for this for 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months? And then the last piece is around how do you start to transform your business in this time where people are open to you testing new concepts?
Excellent point. So Tony, You're at Communique or capital C, and your clients call you strategically. We've got a crisis we're not sure to do. How would you guide them?
Well, I think the one word that connects everybody in marketing and sales is attention. It's the oxygen of all human endeavor. The only way you can teach, mentor, coach, market, sell is to get the attention of the people that matter most to you. Our problem pre-COVID is just we're starving for attention. Forget everything else that's going on in the world. We had too much and too many chasing a finite amount of time. Consumers were being asked to drink content through a firehouse. So as good as you thought your idea was in your brand and the shiny object, the PowerPoint presentation, seeking capital, whatever your intention was, more often than not just got spilt on the floor because we just don't have the capacity. That was the first problem. So attention. The second thing we're dealing with now, though, which is even more important, is how do I get attention? Because even if I think I have permission to do it, the number one word that we got to be thinking about is trust. Trust is broken. I don't trust things anymore. I don't trust enterprise. I don't trust what I'm reading. So trust is really fundamental in the value proposition. So the thing that I'd be advising people to do is first and foremost, really look at what brands, if any, matter to the customers that matter to you. Now, when Coke tells me they can open happiness, I really don't trust that anymore. It might be the past where big celebrity would come out with Coke and it kind of go, that's kind of sexy. And maybe I should walk around with a Coke and I can be like, those days are done. So I look at, first of all, I'd say to my clients, what brands play an emotional or functional role helping your customers get to where they need to go? What quest are they on? Right now, I would say to you, security, survival, getting a job, family time, learning how to live together, all the things that are happening within this new world. Does my brand play a role in that quest? And if so, then how do I communicate it? How do I insert my way into my customer story versus shouting mine? So I think that's the first thing I would do. The second thing is I'd be very careful about looking like, which we saw with a lot of companies that went out and said, we're environmentally sound company. We're all about the planet. And then the social media exposed a supply chain that showed a lot of warts and flaws. So I'd be very careful before I got involved in this social justice movement to really look at my employees, my board of directors, my company, my messaging, and make sure if you're going to make a real statement, if you want to rebuild trust, then you better act like you do versus just say what you think the customer wants to hear. So attention, first of all, tough to get. Prioritize your brands, focus on the ones that really matter to somebody's life and journey. Communicate those in a nice subtle way, become part of their story versus shouting yours. And fourth, be very careful, as our panelists have so said, being that we're all in this together kind of mantra that we're hearing out there, unless you can really stand in the glare of that social media spotlight, because when it gets turned on you, it's intense.
Totally. So Tony, I want to stay with you and pick up on something that you said. So you sort of said, if you're a brand, my words, not yours, a brand that matters given the current times. If I'm a brand that doesn't matter, one that's more on the periphery, and I don't want to appear insensitive or tone deaf, what should those brands do when a crisis like this is taking place? Do they continue as they were in the past, or do they have to make adjustments in their strategy, or do they go radio silent knowing there's more important things?
I think it becomes more tactical. It's more pricing. Make sure you got a great positioning online. Make sure you got a great positioning at retail if that's where you engage the customer. Get your ingredient deck right so you're doing less damage to the planet. If you're creating it in Canada, celebrate the fact that you're about jobs. Find the areas that you still stand for something and stand out. And I would try to lead with those. But again, it's not about the loud rock and roll rock anthem kind of singing and jingle marketing of the past. Focus on the little tiny things. And I so well said, personalization is key. I mean, the beauty about social media, the advantage of it is, instead of being this big drift net, one size fits all, look at me, I can fly fish in. So before the panel, we were talking about, everybody's talking about their experiences with dogs and veterinarians and what they went through, the emotional state of dog owners. Well, I can find dog owners online. So if I have a product that helps you be a better dog owner or make your pet happier or sleep better, then I can fly fish that into you. So again, less is more, highly personalized, but again, don't talk about things where you can't stand to the scrutiny of how you've been scrutinized by consumers out there.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Abena, would you agree? I know Tony touched on some of the things that you were talking about, personalization and the number of communications. Anything to add on that in terms of this notion of being not appearing tone deaf or insensitive to your consumers?
I agree with Tony's statements. I'd say that on the stand of racism and discrimination, whether you're big or small, I think it's something that you should be looking at as a brand and looking at your company and your hiring practices. And so it's not something that you necessarily have to shout from the rooftops, but I do think it's a time for all organizations to look at how they can help move us forward as opposed to keeping us locked in the past.
Yeah, if I missed that point, my point wasn't to ignore that, because that's the new social contract if you want to be in business. My point is, don't talk about it until you actually can deliver on it. And I think that's the important thing, is make sure you can stand behind the messaging is really what I was trying to make.
Totally. So Abena, should brands take a stand on racial discrimination? What's your perspective on that, particularly given the backdrop of today's economic landscape?
I think that it depends on the type of brand you are. And so if you're a Fortune 500 company, absolutely, you are in the spotlight. And so you should be taking a stand. If you're on the periphery, as Tony has talked about, getting your shop in order. We've seen brands come out and take a stand. PepsiCo and Quaker Oats is a great example where they took a stand, and then, you know, you peel back the layers and you see Aunt Jemima and some of the brands that they currently have still perpetuate this image from slavery. And so it is a time of reflection and looking at how we can all do better within our own organizations.
Yeah, for sure. Say what you do and do what you say, essentially. And so, Tali, what do you think brands should do with respect to, if they are going to take a stance on discrimination or marginalized communities? What would be your best advice on how they go about doing that?
I just actually want to hop on what Abena was speaking about. And few big brands actually pulling out in July or pausing their campaigns on Facebook, because Facebook didn't remove hate comments, haters. So that's one of the example about what Tony mentioned, actually doing, not just saying, right? So they pausing their campaigns because Facebook didn't take some measurements to remove some haters' comments. And I actually want to bring one specific organization. I think they did great job pivoting. It's BNI. I'm sure many of you heard about it. It's Business Networking International. So they have about 9,000 chapters worldwide, and they meet weekly. So basically members of the chapters, depends, 20, 30, 40 people, 50 people, they meet weekly for networking and referrals, right? So obviously it's all physical. Now, what do you do when you have situation of COVID, right? And quarantine, you can't actually meet physically. And they pivoted really quickly to online meetings, and their logo and their rebrand as well, saying now more than ever. So basically all the members support each other, because some businesses obviously can't operate in current situation, if it's maybe a restaurant or hairdresser salons or whatever it is. So they really support each other, and the new logo saying now more than ever. So I think it was really quick pivoting, and they did a great job, in my opinion, supporting members as well. So that shows that they did support their members, and they did all they can to do it as soon and as fast as possible.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. It's a good brand. And Tony, question for you to kick us off on this one. Question on my kid's mind all the time, my wife, people that I work with. Will we return to normal? If so, when? And what will the new normal look like?
I mean, that's, you know, the quick answer is no. And even if we get a vaccination, I think that we've been really shook up. And we're not only being shook up financially, we've been shook up emotionally. And so that's the first thing I would say. It's just going to take a long time for that to settle. I mean, that's a massive earthquake, and it's going to be a lot of rubble to dig out. The other thing that I think we have to be really concerned about is our politicians seem to be relishing in this idea of ruling versus governing. And we're seeing the suspension of democracy. We're seeing arbitrary acts. We're seeing people act as if they're almost in a dictatorship point of view. And that's going to be hard to pull back on, because they're going to use that as, I needed to govern that way, I needed to rule that way. That was the only way to get through this crisis. So given what our forebears fought for in terms of democracy and freedom of rights, I'm hoping that that's one of the first things we attack as a society and also start marching for, because without freedom, without democracy, without parliament, without a counterpoint, we're putting too much power in the hands of one body. And that to me is one of the most dangerous places we've been in as what I would once call free world.
And what do you think that would mean for like brands and marketers, though, to your notion that things are going to change and it's a dangerous situation right now? Do they need to contemplate anything different in the future than they would have when they're planning out strategically?
Well, I mean, the great meme that I heard, and again, probably fake news, but 90 million Americans lost their job, and $900 billion was created in the clouds. And so I think that there's going to be some businesses that are going to do incredibly well in the next decade. But the casualty is going to be jobs. They're going to be the businesses that automate. They don't need railway tracks anymore. They don't need shipping lanes. They don't need lakes to ship goods. So much is happening in the cloud. We've all moved to the Zoom world, remote world. We're all deploying some of this new technology. So they're going to do incredibly well. I mean, the Amazon's going to run away with everything. But the casualties might be our main streets. It might be the jobs. It might be the... So I think it's the important thing of all, and I want to be all negative because my podcast, the last 10 episodes, was all in small business. I do believe if we unleash the entrepreneurs in Canada, and if we unleash that creative community out of this rubble, we're going to see a lot of green shoots, and those green shoots are going to grow into an incredible new economy that might counter this sort of multinational capitalist, treat Canada more or less like a marketplace to sell their goods, where entrepreneurship is a place to create and envision and think and reinvent and reimagine. So the good side, there'll be things making it happen. What I'm hoping through small business, Canada has a seat at the table.
Yeah, totally. Tali, what do you think? When's this going to end and how will it look different?
Yeah, I believe that I agree with Tony that things not going to be back to the way they used to be before, and it will be a new normal, right? Whatever normal was before COVID and after, it's not the same normal. Many businesses realize that actually they can operate and reach, farther and international maybe business what they couldn't do before. So actually, virtually, maybe it's effective as same as in person, maybe not the same, but in some ways it is. And some big companies actually, they will be operating remotely until the end of the year at least for their employees, like Google, Shopify, and others. And I suspect it will continue the next year. So what does it mean? I don't know how commercial real estate will be affected in regarding, and it's not just offices, retail as well, right? A lot of stores, they move in a lot of operation more to online rather than physical. So it will be kind of a rolling ball effect. I don't know how long it might take, but things for sure not going to be the same way as they used to be before.
And Abena, what about you? What do you think? Will we return to normal? And if so, what impact will it have on marketers and brands?
I think there's a new normal, as Tali and Tony have talked about. And frankly, I welcome the new normal. I think there's 4 major things to consider. One, technology is a great enabler. We saw brands that said previous to COVID, you couldn't work remotely, and they had to. And so kind of that was a lie, right? We can work remotely. And so how do we use technology to enable us moving forward? Because we're expecting a second wave. I think, as Tali pointed out with the BNI example, there's a need for brand agility. So how can you move quickly given what you're hearing in the market? Whether it's social justice, whether it's a health crisis, whether it's the recession, brands have to be more agile now in this space than ever before. The third piece I think about is workforce elasticity. And so what I mean by that is fractional or on-demand workforce. So companies that went into this pandemic and experienced that shutdown either had to lay off workers, reduce salaries, and they're potentially looking at moving forward. If there is a second wave, how can I create some elasticity so that I'm not hit with a cash flow, a drain to the cash flow when I don't have the sales to correspond. And the last piece, I think, is this disruption that's going on. We're seeing disruptions to supply chains. We're seeing disruptions to industries. And on the industry area, you've got tourism, you've got sports, you've got event-based industries that have to look at how do they protect against the second wave as we know it's coming. And so how are those businesses changing?
Yeah, that's great. So I'll stay with you, Abena, on this one because it's related to what we just talked about. So as you think about the crisis that's currently taking place right now, are there any brands that come to mind where you're either seeing their communication or you've heard about them, where you think, you know what, they're doing a pretty good job in terms of navigating their way through this crisis, both in terms of being empathetic and the right cadence on communication, all the things that you talked about earlier? Are there a few examples that come to mind?
There are a couple. I think that, I guess the disclaimer I would put out is, no one does it perfectly. So as much as you're going to get praise, there's going to be some little thing that people are going to pick on. And so the brands that I think about Nike first and foremost, because they stood with Colin Kaepernick back in 2016 when he started to take a knee, and they've been able to continue bringing a light to discrimination and how we need to change and move the nation, the US forward and globally. I think of Procter and Gamble. They started a series back, I believe in 2013, where it talked about unconscious bias. They had several commercials. One was the look, another was the choice, and another one was the talk. I actually didn't see them when they came out originally because I don't watch a lot of TV. A lot of the things I watch might be recorded. But when I saw the commercials recently, because they started rerunning them, given the social justice movement, I found that it really spoke to me and my family. And I can imagine how it can help move conversations forward. The last one that I thought of was around, and it has to deal with my dog, PetSmart. And this was an example that Tali talked about in terms of being able to pivot quickly. And so as soon as businesses were shut down, dog owners still have to feed their dogs. PetSmart went to curbside pickup. And so those brands who are able to pivot in the marketplace and continue that communication so customers understand how to interact with them are the ones that are going to come out of this ahead.
Yeah, great examples. And Tali, would you add to Abena's list or any brands for you that sort of stand out so far?
Yeah, so I actually saw a couple of posts that were quite interesting. One, it's a smaller clothing store called 18 East, and they posted about Black Lives Matter. And it was, again, not how you put it out, but you don't sound fake and like everyone else, right? So they were saying that we're not trying to sell you anything. And clothes, it's really the minimal that basically could be, it's not high ticket items. And they closed their site, but they were accepting donations. So I think it was a great move. I know that some brands like Digital Marketer, they offered free of charge courses online. And I know a few organizations offered this kind of service to support people staying at home. So basically free of charge, usually it's depends, either program cost or monthly cost, but they offered for a certain period of time free. So I think it's great as well to support people. And going to brands that quickly pivoted, as I mentioned, BNI, I think they did a great job. And Home Depot, I just had to use it, and I'm sure many of you did as well. It happened just right after stores closed. So they did a quick job. And I think they did amazing job. You put order, you get email, you come there, curbside pickup, everything was smooth. Like they did great job and quickly. Yeah.
Thanks, Tali. Tony, who's doing it right?
Well, I think a lot of the big brands have been mentioned. I do give a lot of credit to RBC for what they're doing with the future of work. I think I go back to these 10 owners that I covered in my podcast. Each one of them had to pivot. Ernesto Gomez comes back from a flight in Spain, finds out he has to close his 4 restaurants in Vancouver. He gets hit with COVID. For the next 10 days, he's fighting for every breath. but still fighting to keep his restaurants going and his employees' jobs alive. Paul Hembrow from Health Hub, he's in the business of renting TV screens to hospital patients, turns it into a two-way center so that people in isolation can communicate with their patients. So I really look to that small business owner again that just finds that unmet need and leaps at it, and has that appetite, not because it's even just the right thing for their business, but it's about the livelihood of their people, it's their customers. And I think that resilience is really where I take a lot of confidence in as we come out of this, is if we keep that going and keep investing in these people, which is, I just go off topic, I think it's shameless that we've taken these kids and paying them to stay at home when we should have given that money to small business owners to pay kids to come work there. And I think that attitude as a country that we see in small business, we need to bottle as our DNA going forward. And I think they just have they are the ones that inspire me every day. I mean, they're the ones that I go, I feel that we're going to have a future one small business at a time.
Totally. So Tony, I'm going back to my career because I've been in this situation several times. So you're a marketer in a brand, and there's a crisis happening, and you feel this impetus that you have to do something. And so if you were advising marketers today on pitfalls or things that they should avoid doing during a crisis, because we talked about the things that you should do, what shouldn't they do? Or what should they be mindful of not doing?
Let me start with what they should do. They should open their minds. Almost, I wish we taught every marketer philosophy and psychology and history, as opposed to just jumping into a business school with stats and accounting, because I think that the way we're going to open our minds and solve some of these big social contracts is just having much more empathy. So if I was, the first thing I'd say to a marketer is take advantage of this time and really open your mind. Get outside the walls of your business and the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps, and really think about the human race and think about the journey they're on. If I was talking to an individual and what they should avoid is they should avoid reacting. It's because nowadays with social media, it's so easy to put out a tweet or an Instagram post or a TikTok video, but it's not the time to react. It's the time to self-reflect. We've been given a gift the last couple of months. If people haven't taken this as a gift to hug their kids again and take their dogs out for more walks and look around at the marketplace and see how people are working together and living together and realizing maybe the role of marketing is to foster that sense of positivity and possibility. And that's what I'd be advising marketers to do. So it's a little bit more of a humble, more of a servitude, more about thinking leaders are there to serve others, as opposed to maybe the hierarchy and he who shouts loudest wins mentality of the past. So the ones that
what about you? What would you avoid? If you were guiding marketers, what would you tell them to avoid?
Sorry, did you say Abena? I didn't hear you.
Yes, I did. I apologize.
Okay, great. I think that everything that Tony said is true. What I think about is this phrase, manage the crisis, don't let the crisis manage you. And part of that is taking your time to figure out how you want to react and what you want to communicate. I think it's also a time where to get in touch with that empathetic side that Tony was talking about calls for collaboration and more communication. And so if you've got a message that's going out there, get some second opinions, some objective opinions that can give you feedback based on the lane that they're in versus the lane you're in. Are there things that you can't see because you've got blinders on or one specific set of experience? So, when we talk about diversity, it's also diversity of understanding who your client base or your segments are. And so I would really urge marketers to avoid thinking that what they used to do will happen. They can still use going forward.
That's great. Tali, how about you?
Yeah, so I would use this time to actually build a relationship with customers. It's great opportunity and it's basically adding value and building better relationship. What I would recommend to avoid or consider if there was any automated programs going on, really reconsider it and pause it as soon as possible, because it could be, pre-scheduled prior to, and it might be the messaging might be not suitable to the current situation. And we saw a few examples of such. For example, with points, and I have a few others I don't want to mention. But it's really to reconsider and be more empathetic and more personal. trying to support and build better relationship with customers, really.
Thanks, Tali. That's great. So I have one final question before we open it up to additional questions coming in from the audience. So Winston Churchill once said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Starting with you, Tony, and I know we touched on a lot of these themes. And so what new and emerging opportunities do you think are going to arise out of a global crisis like this that brands and marketers can really take advantage of?
I think it was so well said, with the sense of collaboration, taking off your blinders, being open-minded to other people's points of view is a great one. I think the second one is working remote. Some people love it, some people hate it. And we have to come to terms with that. And then I think as humans, we're social creatures. So I think as marketers, we realize that there's a lot of pent-up demand to get people back together, whether that's at a pub having a beer or meandering down Main Street. Don't be afraid to celebrate the human race, because inside humans, 95% of all humans and 95% of all are wonderful and special and caring and loving people. So as marketers, celebrate it and enjoy it, and don't be afraid to talk about the positive sides of who we are.
Yeah, great advice. Abena?
I feel like this opportunity is a tree being shaken. And so we're all being shaken to look at how we can do things differently. And the example I would turn to is the education system. You know, as soon as schools shut, they had to go online to deliver learning. And so is there an opportunity from an education perspective to change the way kids learn? We have all of this research that talk about the differences between the way boys and girls learn, left side of the brain versus right side of the brain. Can we start bringing more of those learnings into the education system? And then you look at, again, you pivot and you look at sports. And so with COVID and social distancing, are there other ways to deliver that sporting experience, being at a game or a tennis match, without having people be physically in an arena?
Yeah, education, that's a great one. Tali?
Yeah, I would look at the situation as an opportunity. So even looking back, when Google, Facebook, nobody knew about them, investing in those two giants back then, it was risky. Now it's no brainer, right? So of course I would invest. So I would consider it as an opportunity. And I feel like this current situation and crisis, it brought people together more. If people were ignoring certain things prior, or maybe, brushing it away, now I feel people trying to support more each other. And overall, it's great, right? And it's building better community. So I feel from technology perspective, technology and AI, it will grow even more. E-commerce, obviously, it was going crazy before. Now it will be even more important. But overall, people pivoting and adjusting, and just don't be afraid to try new things and pivot quickly. If it doesn't work, then go to different things, but not sitting and waiting until someone else doing something first, second, third, and you try, but it's not using. I would say just try new things and don't be afraid. And it could be a great opportunity as well, on a positive note.
Yeah, good advice, Tali. So I think we're going to pause now. We got about 10 to 12 minutes left. So we're going to open it up to some questions. Andrew?
Hi there. One question coming through. Is it wrong for companies to stay silent if they are not sure about how to articulate their values or their stand on things like social justice and some of the other dynamics that are happening during this period? Kind of building on what a number of the panelists have said about being true to your values, and as well, don't just say but do. But if you're not sure how to articulate that, or that you may suffer from the scrutiny, are you better off to stay silent?
So Abena, what do you think? Are you better off to stay silent?
Well, I think that when you are choosing observation over action, you can at times be considered part of the problem. I think you have to think about the role you play in that landscape. So if you are McCain's Plumbing in Oakville, you don't necessarily have to have a whole campaign around social justice. However, if you are a major charitable organization that works in the community, then you need to say something. An interesting stat, a 2019 survey said 74% of consumers think brands should have should take a stand on issues in a crisis. And so, as Tony talked about earlier, it's around being able to walk the talk when you put that message out there. So it's the difference between putting up a message and supporting the change that's going on versus how can you donate, how can you move the movement forward. I'd suggest looking at what role you play in that landscape and thinking about what's best for your organization to support that movement forward.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Tony, is there a time where you'd ever want to stay silent?
I mean, it's so well said. If you're just observing and not even getting together and trying to discover who you are, you're guilty as charged, because I think we should all be looking and saying, how can we do better? I think this is a beautiful time to be in business. If I was a young marketer, I'd say, you know, I used to go in the world to sell stuff. Now there's a higher purpose. The world's calling for you to have a North Star, that something's greater than profit, and finding that delicate dance between the two, standing for and standing out. And at the same time, still driving your business forward is an incredibly exciting time. And a young person that can come in that has perspective, that has credentials, that has lived the streets, that have felt racial discrimination, or that grew up at a point where they were bullied, and they can come into an organization and be part of that conversation. They have a seat at the table for the first time, and not because it's the right thing to do, because they need to have their voice heard. So I think it's an incredible time to find that North Star. But the point is, stay silent until you do. And act upon it, and show and demonstrate that it's much more than a mission statement that hangs on a wall. This is an intent by which we hire and we market and we message and we promote and reward.
Do as you say as you do. Tali, are you in the same place?
Yeah, great points, Abena and Tony. Actually, I wanted to add, I saw a post from Capital One. It was from hiring manager, and they were hiring for certain position, I think in marketing something. And basically they say, we want to put an offer, even if we see someone who is suitable, until we interview a certain number from different diversity. So they wanted to bring diversity, and they did it by action without, they won't put an offer to someone until they interview a certain number of people from diversity groups. So I think it was a great move. Yeah.
Yeah, great responses from the panel. Andrew, other questions?
Kind of building on that, another one. So are there, like, that North Star, or that, being more, I'll call it values-based or value-driven, what's come up is, are there any examples of resilience, or perhaps better put, doing better by doing good, or some businesses that have formed in this period that are leading with values and are experiencing success as a result? That I don't know if any come to mind from any of the panelists.
Yeah, it's a great question. Tony, would you, any come to mind for you?
My season finale, again, again, this podcast isn't about me, it's about these small business heroes. Sheena Russell, Made with Local, started off selling granola bars at a farmer's market, quit her job, started to build it. She wanted a labor force, and she's so value driven. She went to social enterprise. She went to people that have barriers to traditional work and got them to manufacture her product. Wow. And this business is just growing and getting into retail, going across the country. As soon as COVID hit, the government put these people, because they were high risk, away, took them away from her. This was her culture. They're people, the first time ever, they really felt they belonged and were part of success. So there's stories like this all over Canada where people go, yeah, it'd be easier to manufacture, maybe take it offshore, find the cheapest way to do it. But what she stood for, and it continues as she moves her business across Canada, is this sense of social enterprise matters to her. And she doesn't even communicate to the customer. She's a B certified corporation, one of the highest standards of new ways of doing business in terms of serving the planet and the people ahead of profits. And she just does it because it's the right thing to do. So there's a lot of great stories like that. And if you ever see a B certified logo, pick up that brand, because you're not just buying something that might taste good. You're buying something that's really good for humanity and the planet.
Yeah, Tony, you're so spot on. There are a lot of great B Corps across a number of product and service groups, for sure. Tali, Abena, anything to add to that? Any brands for you?
Yeah, I know someone locally. She started a business, speaking about the dogs, home cooked healthy food for dogs, especially little dogs. And this lady, she created e-commerce store. So basically people can order online, she delivers. And it was quite challenging times, but saying that, she was managing through the crisis. And it was pretty amazing, and it was all healthy and home cooked food for dogs.
Oh, fantastic.
Nice. I'll jump in with two examples, one small, one large. One is a local business that manufactures custom bras, Ruby's bras. And as soon as the pandemic hit, she pivoted and started manufacturing face masks. And so that's an awesome way that businesses have shown that they're helping move us through this health crisis. Another brand that comes to mind, I believe it was Hilton, and I can't remember who they partnered with, but they started renting out their rooms to essential workers. So healthcare workers could stay at Hilton Honors during the crisis, which is another awesome way to support those who are at the front lines helping us get through this.
Yeah, what a great way to actually really walk the talk, right? By actually putting your product and service at the forefront. That's great. Andrew, back to you. Other questions?
In the time remaining, I think we'll grab this last one, kind of as a recap of today's discussion as well. As many companies look to online digital marketing in the absence of other options, how do small businesses, given the 90+ % of Canadian business, build trust and visibility to compete with the bigger firms, even if there's the likes of a boycott of Facebook marketing and so on? How does the David compete with Goliath and build trust along the way?
Abena, do you want to maybe take that one?
Sure. I think that I'll call on Tony's point early on. It's around that trust piece. And it's a time to build relationships. So people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's what my marketing prof used to always say. And I think in this environment, it rings true. And so what are the ways that you can demonstrate to customers that you care about them so that they will look at you as an opportunity to solve one of their problems or challenges? So how can you learn about that customer's experience so that your brand becomes part of their lived and shared experience?
Yeah, that's great. Tali?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Abena. It's time to build relationship and to bring value to customers, actually. And bigger or smaller brand, it's not necessarily bigger brand. Obviously, they will have bigger budgets, but you can be creative and by building a community and building the campaigns to avoid this, if you're speaking about the cost. And again, building the relationship with your customers and standing on your values as a business. It's really important. What basically you bring to the table, right? How you solve certain problems and what you bring to the table. Yeah.
And Tony, over to you to bring us home.
I think the beautiful thing about the Expedias of the world and the sense of liking and validation is small business can build ambassadors. They can have raving fans. They can have fans that love their business. The best coffee, organic bean in the beach, you have to have the coffee there. And they talk with passion and they talk with experience. The sense of belonging that Airbnb rebuilt their business on, this localization. That's where small business's sweet spot is. We said it earlier with personalization, but really being part of that local community. You're hiring local people. You're celebrating the local parades. You're involved with putting plants up on the stands and make those streets look good. Celebrate that fact. And I think our social conscience as a community is going to go much more towards small business, because jobs are going to matter as much as fresh air and fresh water in the next decade. And I think the small businesses are creating the jobs will get rewarded with our dollars.
Awesome. Well, I just want to take the time to special thanks to our panel, Abena, Tony, and Tali, for a really great, robust discussion. Really appreciate you taking the time. I also want to thank the Response Marketing Association, we're also known as the RMA, and just to let those that don't know what the Response Marketing Association does, it's really a forum or community for professional marketers and marketers that want to enter into the field. And it's really focused on 3 key areas: providing network opportunities, advocacy, as well as education and knowledge. And this is one of the forums using webinars to help educate seasoned marketers and future marketers. So again, just a special thank you back to our panelists. And for more information on the RMA, you can go to responsema.org and be sure to sign up for our email summit, which is coming up towards the end of September. And when you do sign up, you'll get a free annual membership in the RMA. And so once again, big thank you to our panelists and to our audience. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good long weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Canada Day.
Happy Canada Day.
Bye, thanks. Bye, Abena. Bye, Tony. Bye, Tali.
Bye, guys.